Hello, and welcome back to Manna at the Tap. I'm Gloria, and I'm pleased to offer this daily podcast that provides spiritual nourishment to feed the soul with manna in bite-sized portions. Today is Thursday, April the 4th, 2024, and we are leaving the pathway of the New Testament and journeying back into the Old Testament, stopping in at the first chapter of the book of Daniel. The book bears the author's name, and the stories he tells are of his time as a Jewish exile from Judah living in Babylon. When King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, now located within modern-day Iraq, about 80 kilometers south of Baghdad, invaded Judah, his strategy was to choose the brightest and best young men and educate them in the ways of the Babylonians. They were to be taught the language and literature. After 3 years, they would enter the king's service. One way to assimilate the exiles from Judah into the culture was to change their Hebrew names associated with their God to Babylonian names related to their gods. Daniel was unwilling to allow anyone to change his name. And his name means God is my judge. God was judging the people of Judah because of their disobedience and unwillingness to listen to his prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and some lesser known minor prophets. It was God who allowed the Babylonians to invade the land of Judah, and the consequences were a brain drain of their brightest and best, leaving the nation of Judah on life support and losing the next generation. Daniel was unwilling to conform to the new culture, and he refused to relinquish his relationship with God, even though he was far from Jerusalem and the temple. He was determined not to succumb to the pressures of the new culture he found himself in. According to the laws of Moses, Jews were forbidden from eating certain foods, and Daniel and his friends requested to be exempt from the food and wine served on the king's table. Daniel proposed a 10-day fast, eating only vegetables and drinking water to maintain their dietary restrictions. However, the chief official was in a dilemma. He worried about losing his job and position if Daniel and his friends looked worse off than the other men. After the 10-day fast, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and better nourished than any other young man who dined with the king. God also rewarded Daniel and his three friends with exceptional understanding and knowledge of literature and learning. Moreover, Daniel had an additional skill. He could comprehend visions and dreams of all kinds. The food the king offered his guests was of the finest fare. The changes in names were designed to help the young men forget their past and think of themselves as part of the culture in which they were now living. But a careful reading of the book of Daniel will show that he never acknowledged the new name and identity. The stories of Daniel's life beg us to ask ourselves, how can I live in exile, the diaspora, away from the familiar, and still be faithful to God. Daniel was loyal to his God, which shaped his identity and helped him continue to hold on to the same values he brought with him into the dominant culture. Daniel wanted to please God in every aspect of his life, even in his old age. Now, Daniel never returned home to Judah, but he was still connected to his ancestral home because he stayed and prayed 3 times a day with his face toward Jerusalem. What might we learn about Daniel? He was willing to honor God in all the circumstances that came his way. He was loyal, and he was not willing to conform to the Babylonian lifestyle. The answer to the question posed was, how can we live in exile, the diaspora, away from the familiar, and still be in a faithful relationship with God? Romans chapter 12, from the J.B. Phillips New Testament, reminds us, don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold, but let God remold your mind from within so that you may prove in practice that the plan of God for us is good. Would you please join me again tomorrow as we hear more stories about Daniel?